And we are live. Hey guys, this is Ruben Dua on Dubb's podcast Connection Loop. Today we are going to be meeting with Marty Bickford. We are going to talk about this seriously cryptic but interesting but valuable conversation of having dialogue with your customer's brain. So Marty, if you could just start with a very short bio and let's get into the topic.
Great. My name is Marty Bickford. I've been in the startup world in Silicon Valley for just over 25 years. I've done 6 different startups. Most of them turned out pretty good. Couple of exits, and most recently left a position at an ad tech platform running customer success. And now I'm at a startup called Boss Startup Science, where we're helping founders navigate early stage decisions.
And what are some of those early stage decisions that need the most help, would you say?
So a lot of that depends on the founder, right? And their expertise, and first-time founders have a lot more things that they can easily get wrong than people who've done it a few times. So what we see is that people step in the same mistakes over and over again. One of the things that I think is probably weakest, right? We all know about concepts about, sizing your market dynamics, and even things like that maybe a few years ago weren't as popular, defining your ideal customer profile. But I'd say one of the weakest things that early founders do whenever they are planning for an exit is they don't actually plan for the exit. So people can describe their customers in detail, right? Their customer for their company could be described in detail as well. And in fact, the decisions that you make early on, especially as you start to scale and get traction with your customers, you're making operational decisions, you're making funding decisions that will affect your ability to exit. And not planning for an exit early on, I think, is one of the most common mistakes that I see.
So it's almost like a reverse engineering effort where we need to think about our ultimate goal and then kind of rewind back and how it affects our daily and long-term decisions.
We think it's complicated, but it's really not. Acquisitions are made based on a few drivers, right? And everybody can understand these drivers. It's not rocket science. You're either going to add to company revenues, right, and stay as a pure play and not affect operations a whole lot. You're getting bought because you're going to save the company money in some way, or you're going to increase their current operations because your customers line up to theirs, right? And one of the most important things is always getting the customer to line up. So do you have a crossover rate already that will save you money, or do you have an upsell opportunity? If you build your customer base and spend years doing that customer base, how well it aligns to your eventual acquisition partner directly determines your valuation multiples.
Very well said. Yeah. So important to keep those things in mind, no matter what size of business you are, because it doesn't have to be Google that acquires you. It could be a company that's 10x your size, even a medium-sized business. So very, very important to remember that.
Absolutely.
Now, talking about the customer's brain and what their needs are, the challenges that they're going through, how we can find product market fit to provide scalable, repeatable solutions to them to get them to become repeat customers and eventually evangelists. Talk to us about that process. How do we streamline that whole listening and then being proactive process?
So one of the things I would say right after the bat, right, is a lot of people confuse efficiency for effectiveness, right? And this is not a process that we're that interested in getting. We want to get bang for our buck, right? We want to do that in everything we do. But listening to our customers and all those steps you just described, they're not things that we look to create efficiencies against, right? This is where the value creation happens. The more time you spend with the customer, the better your business is going to be. That's regardless of any stage of business. So this is not something that you try to get better at from an efficiency perspective. You try to carve out time for this on a weekly basis, right? No matter what size of company you're at. So if you're talking to your customers, right, and you get them to talk about things other than you, right? And the issues that you have together, and you talk about things that are other things that are going on in their business, you get a much more holistic view of the customer, right? You've learned things that aren't just about will they use the product, or your buttons in the right spot, but you learn other valuable things like where they go to find out new information, right? What are those are marketing avenues. So when we talk about product market fit, we have to understand the holistic customer, because it's not just fit in terms of price. It's not just fit in terms of can the customer operationalize this for themselves, but it's also fit in terms of can you actually acquire those customers at a rate that's profitable, right? All three of those things have to go together.
Yeah, and that alignment is finding that alignment oftentimes is the result of failure, because it's where runways get burned up. It's where we get confused into this pattern of continually changing, trying to adapt to our customers and not sort of putting our flag into the ground on something. It's where challenges happen from an economics perspective. What would you say some tips are in terms of creating a strategy to, well, as Reid Hoffman says it, building the airplane while we're flying it?
So, they call it the Valley of Death for a reason, right? So, couple of minutes, probably not going to solve a whole lot of problems out there for people, but I do have a little bit of advice, right? And that is early on, if you've worked in later stage companies where efficiency is critical, right? And shaving points off of things matters. You understand that productization of things is extremely important, right? So understanding what's in the box and what's not in the box, those should be very serious decisions, right? And it's one thing to pivot marketing messaging. It's one thing to pivot pricing and play with business models. When you start overreaching into customization, right, you actually don't have a product, and you don't have you might have a service, right, that you want to productize. You can build boxes around that too. It's just really important to understand where the pain is at your point in time. So how costly is it for us to make a pivot? Pivoting in a Fortune 500 company is very expensive, right? Pivoting at a startup can be much less expensive. And like you said, you're going to hurt your runway, you're going to hurt your turnaround times, but those are decisions that may ultimately get you through that valley. So I would encourage pivots. The failure comes at failing to pivot too late, right? You miss the opportunity, you burn the runway, or putting all of your eggs in the basket. Like one of the things that's just drastically important at the beginning is optionality. Finding enough customers in that ideal customer profile, so you know who to listen to and who not to listen to, and then you boil that down to the MVP, which should have a very clean definition, meaning they will actually pay for it, right? It's not an MVP unless you have paying customers. Otherwise, it's a prototype. So you have to sell something, you have to box it in, and just as you grow, as you start to scale, those boxes should expand at a much slower rate than they do in the beginning, right? In the beginning, we're throwing boxes out and starting with fresh piece of paper, and that's the way it should be. The other thing about putting things into boxes is that people love boxes, right? Our brain is able to digest something that has boundaries. So this is not just true in one-to-one selling and negotiations, but this is true in our response to understanding information. So if we can put something in a box and understand it well, right, then that becomes one of two things. It either is going to become entertaining to me and I'm curious, maybe there's something different that's changed, but it's not going to hurt me. I know how this box is going to operate with me, right? And when we buy new products, all the new ways that the startups are coming out for people to work, we're asking people to change, not just change out one box to the other. We're trying to mess up all the boxes that they got, right? And that's a scary proposition. So boxing things in helps the brain not react in a flight mechanism without the lines drawn around your box. what ends up happening is the brain interprets this as either something that is extremely interesting and I need to pay attention to it, or extremely dangerous, because our brains respond to the threat of us over spending too much energy on analyzing something, right? So when we're asked to overanalyze and make assumptions and understand things that aren't clear to us, that's a threat. And the brain is old, and it's literally telling us, stop this. This is meaningless nonsense. You might get eaten by a bear, right? And if you're in a boring meeting, you can feel it. Your leg starts to bounce up and down. You start flipping with your pen, right? You're fidgeting. And what your body is telling you is get out of this room. Move the body, get out of this, because the information that you're asking me to digest is a threat to me. Because while I'm trying to figure out this complicated strategy, I might get eaten by a bear, right? So we need to take care of our customers and make sure that they can understand what we're presenting and where those lines are, right? And that's not only benefit to us as a startup, but it helps our customers understand us as well. That was a very long-winded answer.
Yeah, well, no, I really appreciate that. And I think that a couple of things that come to my mind when I think about this topic is, number one is, scarcity mindset versus abundance mindset. Another thing that comes to mind is the idea of just generally being mindful. If we find ourselves rooted in fear, rooted in greed, impatience, then it disallows us to do the listening that we need to do the building that we need to do, to find that fit, that alignment that we need to do, to really map out a plan for longevity. I've seen too many people, and the reason why I'm qualified to say this is because I've been in this mindset and I know what it's like to be desperate. And it's amazing how stinky it is. It's amazing how smelly that is, where people can smell it a mile away. But
the issue here to me is really how other people respond to us.
Yeah.
Right. So this is, to me, why I've always taught my staff etiquette. Right. Etiquette is not something to be ignored. It's something to be indulged in, because what it does is it actually signals to the other person that I'm not a threat. I'm someone that you can trade with. Right. And that's where etiquette came from, was it helped us do trade. And so trade we need a language that tells us I'm not a threat. I have something that actually might benefit you from a business perspective. If I can't get to that, if I can't get that person's attention because I'm coming off as a threat and I don't mean to, then that's a problem. That message is never going to get through. We're never going to get into true dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, can we trade together? This goes back to some of the earliest, commerce-driven, mindset, mentality, and realities, many of which are still so relevant. Do I trust you? Can I trade with you?
Absolutely. Right. And etiquette is just a mechanism for us to tell the other person, yes, you can, right, without saying so.
Right. Now, I'll just kind of pivot the convo. Innovators are often scary. Christensen talks about the innovator's dilemma. He talks about this idea that when we are consuming innovation, when we are innovating, that we're taking risks, that we're potentially destroying trust. Driving a Tesla 10, 15 years ago might have been a scary initiative. How is it that as innovators, we can bring people into the process, get them to trust us, understand that our lab coat is messy. Our hair is messy. Our goggles are scratched with fog all in front of them, because we're in the process of innovation, and that we should not be feared, and rather we should be accepted. We should be. It should be understood that our goal is to help humanity in some way. How can we build that rapport in a more positive way?
That's really interesting question, because I think there's multiple layers. There's generational, the way people acted, and it's probably more okay today to have a bunch of nose piercings than it was 20 years ago, right? So that should be overlooked, and by some section it still won't be. but what it is the messiness, the disheveledness is a signal that I am a threat, right? I don't care about your etiquette. I don't care about your norms and the way that you guys have been doing things for 5 years, because there's a better way now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we don't need to address that. I do think that if things are authentic, if people are being authentic about where they're coming from and their perspective, and maybe it's just easier for me to wear the same shirt 5 days in a row, right?
Right.
And that's fine, right? I literally wore this shirt 5 days in a row and nobody cares, right? But that's not really a threat because it looks like a normal shirt, right? If the shirt said, screw your system, I'm tearing it down, well, maybe that's the message I want to get across. So I would say, if you don't want to scare people, then pay attention to what scares people and don't do that. But don't keep from scaring people if your ideas are upsetting a big system and there are people afraid of that. That should happen. That should continue to happen. I mean, look at the whole metaverse. Look at, my kids think it's great and normal, right? And then there's a whole piece of the population that is just afraid to even try to understand why people think it's important. People think it's ridiculous that it matters at all. Yeah. So that's just a change that we got to get over,
Well, it's so well said. There's sort of this visual that I like to present, which I think I'm trying to remember where I learned this from, who initially stated this. But, when you look at pictures of JayZ back in the day, what do you see? You see a lot of gold. You see a lot of bling on this neck of his. And he obviously, in this photo, he's got a lot to prove here. Okay. I've got wealth. I've got diamonds. I've got money. If you look at JayZ as a more evolved human being, what do you see? You see a simple black t-shirt. Now, this t-shirt might have cost $700. That's not the point, though. Is that what you see in these shots is you see a simplified man. You see a man that has nothing to prove. There's no bling. There's no gold. He's not even wearing a watch, actually, in any of these shots. And I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that oftentimes startup founders, when they're in front of that group of VCs, when they're in front of that client trying to recruit people, is that there's a lot of peacocking that happens. There's a lot of spreadsheet millionaire that happens. There's a lot of chest beating that happens that says, I'm actually not totally secure with what I'm doing, and I'm overcompensating with noise and with bragging and with bogus, frankly. And I think it's amazing because you will see some extremely successful people that are extremely humble. And it's really hard to do that because even though Confucius told us that smart people don't talk a lot, how does one get to know that you're intelligent without speaking? And of course, that's another conversation. And that has to be where it's other people talking about us and hearing certain things, because those are the best things that we want to have said about us, not the things that are said by ourselves, but rather from other people.
Right. I think it's a great point on JayZ, right? And that's fun to look at. And, the other wrinkle I'll throw in there as, a guy who just entered my 50s, maybe it's age too, right? Like the peacocking comes along, I think, with youth, right? You're trying to fit in with this group. You're trying to get them to accept they're trying to do something, right? Making an effort here to fit in. To be accepted. And so I think some of that comes with youth or lack of experience in a circle. But I did ad tech for a few years, and I'll tell you, the egos that I run into in startups got nothing on e-commerce, man. So I think a lot of it comes from lack of confidence too, right? Which also just may be an experience thing. So I think the older you get, it's fairly see-through, and it's also, for me, has become a lot more forgivable over the years. They're not fooling anybody, but I'm not necessarily don't really hold it against them, right? Unless they're just a douche, right? Like, if you don't treat people well, that's one thing, right? Yeah. There can be a lot of peacockers who actually, are good, kind-hearted people at the same time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think I've just been reminded so many times that coming from a place of humility, especially when listening, is what allows our brains and our hearts to connect. It's that empathy, it's that compassion, it's that curiosity. It's not trying to prove something, but rather let me understand the challenges that you're going through. And that's one of the things that I as an entrepreneur and as a businessman in my 40s now, that has taken me a long time to actually learn. It's to be that empathetic listener and to not move my lips, but rather to open up my ears.
Or Ruben, all that stuff you said goes right back to the title, right? This is, if you can listen to your customer the way you just described, you're going to get product market fit, right? If that's if you can listen that openly to people that are the actual people you're going to sell to, right? They got to be the right person, but truly understand them from like a 360 perspective, then that's golden. Right. And it's not easy. I think it's your experience doing this gets you to a point where you can actually be that open. It's not easy to get people to open up like that sometimes too.
So well said. So where can folks learn more about you? Social channels. Here I have your LinkedIn profile. This podcast is called Connection Loop, so we're all about making connections.
Yeah, you can find me, Marty Bickford, on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I'm at Marty Bickford. On America Online, I'm Martin Bickford at AOL.com. But you can also, the startup that we're doing right now is Boss Startup Science. We're providing curriculum for early stage founders that takes you through the basics. It's not available through our site. You have to go through an accelerator that uses our content to get access to it, but we're happy to direct you to some of those guys if you reach out.
Amazing. That sounds really great. So we encourage folks to go to bossstartupscience.com, and then you can put your email right here. And then also take the time to make the connection. Connect with Marty on LinkedIn, search for his name. He'll pop up right there and make that connection. So Marty, thank you so much for the time here, for the insight, for the thought leadership. And we will be listening for you. So thanks again.
Thank you, Ruben. Appreciate it.